the Chamber of Commerce, the Society of Professional Women, and most proudly being the sponsor of the Women Helping Women Mentoring Circle. We've had associates participate in this for several years, and they come out of that more confident. That's always the words that you hear. We're excited that it will be kicking off later this month, having a couple of associates from Fidelity joining there as well. So please join me in welcoming our brilliant speakers to today's program. Fran Bontempo and Kristin Smedley are resilient experts, TEDx speakers, best-selling authors, media hosts, content creators, and presenters who have been featured on entrepreneur.com, Thrive Global, Medium, and others, and are also the co-founders of the Brilliantly Resilient, and of course, pretty darn funny. You'll see. As a young mother, Kristin found herself raising two blind sons. Fran was navigating her son's crushing heroin addiction. With very few resources, they were determined to not only survive, but to thrive. They founded Brilliantly Resilient to teach others to come through those challenges being brilliant, not broken, with tools, strategies, and an action plan to reset with resilience, rise and reveal, and with the brilliance within all of us. You can certainly learn more at www.brilliantlyresilient.net. But for today, you will hear from them right now, live. Please give a warm SPW welcome to Kristin and Fran.
Hey, hi, everybody. I will start screen sharing with this presentation now. I am Fran Bontempo. Here we go. Let me get this set.
You're actually welcoming Kristin, Fran, and Kristin's dogs. I don't know if you can hear them in the background. We just had oil delivered. It's been lovely for 5 minutes.
So I am Fran Bontempo. This is my partner in crime, Kristin Smedley, who had to change her name from Fran Bontempo. You just can't handle two of us. There's only one me. So this is Kristin Smedley. Nicole, I want to thank you so much for bringing me back to your group. I had such a great time the first time I was there. And now that I've joined up with my buddy, Kristin, I just feel like we have such an empowering program for you that I want to share. So as I said, Fran, Kristin, and we are brilliantly resilient, but we weren't always. We had enormous challenges, a little bit of what you heard before, and we'll go into those in a little bit more detail. But after we got together and we met, having been introduced through a mutual friend, we realized that our process for getting through our challenges and crises was very, very similar, and that we had a lot of the same tools and strategies. So when we were going through our challenges, we had very few resources, and we created Brilliantly Resilient to be the resource that we never had. We've broken it down into 3 steps, which is the reset, the rise, which is what we're going to be talking about today, and then how you reveal your brilliance. All 3 of the pieces work together, but the rise is where we get into it and take action. So before we get into that, though, I want to let Kristin maybe introduce a word that you may not have heard before. And there we go.
The word resilience, ladies. I'm sure no one's really heard of this lately, so let's bring it up for the 9 gajillionth time in the past couple of years. I mean, you know, when we first started this, we were defining, look, we have this slide, we leave it in here because we find it hilarious, that we had to really define and get to know the word resilience 2 years ago, and then everybody got to know it. But what we want you to really think about today is when we talk about being brilliantly resilient, we're talking about getting through, as Psychology Today says, through pain and disappointment without letting them crush your spirit, or as we say, without letting them make you feel broken. And we're going to walk you through how we go from the resilience piece, because you guys have so many great resources here in this organization that I'm certain has helped you along to this point where we get to the rise. So we will, we'll give you a little bit of background in how we developed our resilience, and then we're all going to rise together, because we want to get started on this new year in rise mode, not contemplating if we're going to be broken or not.
Yeah. So let's just put this out there. You're resilient. We know you're resilient. Anybody who is here on this call today has already been through the whole resilience thing. It's inherent. We've named it in the last couple of years, which is why, we're all suddenly aware that we're resilient, but you got this. But the reason that we're resilient is because we have all had what we call train wrecks and sucker punches. And our train wrecks and sucker punches, we'll tell you a little bit about that, so you can kind of get where we're coming from. And let me preface this by saying, not all train wrecks and sucker punches are of the level that we had. But whatever you may be going through, and we'll talk about that in a few more minutes, that's your thing. So don't minimize it because it's not blindness or heroin addiction. Here's my story. On Mother's Day of 2010, I learned that my son was a heroin addict. We were at my mother's house celebrating Mother's Day, and I had left the room and suddenly heard a commotion coming from the room that I was in. So I went back in and I found my son shaking uncontrollably on the couch. I will also say that I did not have a perfect child one day and a heroin addict the next day. But as anyone who has experienced crisis can tell you, sometimes your two closest companions in crisis are distraction and denial. I knew that David was having problems and I dealt with them as best I thought I could, but I had no idea what was really going on because I didn't want to see it. So we called the paramedics who came in and kept asking my son, "What did you take? What did you take?" And I'm thinking, he's having a seizure. Get him out of here. Of course, he didn't answer when we were inside the house, but when they got him into the ambulance, he told them that he had taken a pain medication that he had stolen from his grandmother because he couldn't get his hands on heroin that day. When we got to the hospital, the doctors told us about his heroin addiction, but also told us that if they could not reverse the effects of the medication that he had taken, because it was very high in acetaminophen, that he would need a liver transplant if he lived. This was my Mother's Day gift in 2010. This became the beginning of our journey into a nightmare that I would not wish on my worst enemy. But that was the sucker punch and the train wreck for me that started my descent into the pit, as Kristin calls it, and then my awareness that I had inherent resilience and I was going to climb out. Kristin's going to tell you her story now.
Yeah, so I'm sitting here thinking about this group and watching people introduce themselves and what all of your roles and responsibilities are and your purpose in this world. And I'm thinking, I know I got a lot of planning addiction people out there right along with me. And if you are one of those, like, I was just at Staples trying to decide on my new planner for 2022. My son called and I'm like, dude, I'm in the middle of finding a new planner. Like, you can't call me during this. This is my moment. This is my red carpet. Like, I am such a planner. If you're an obsessed planner like that, drop it in the chat. Like, yup, that's me. So I am a massive planner, but I am also, by design, a delirious optimist. I say it proud. I'm going to get a shirt made. I am a delirious optimist. So when you combine optimism with an obsession for planning, you can imagine, big shocker, that I set a ton of goals my whole life and worked hard and achieved them all. And I know that there's a lot of high achievers in this group too. So I feel like I'm with my people today. So I went my whole life, of course I have 4 brothers too. So I think I was also expected that I'd have my act together as those goofballs were like turning backyards into wiffle ball kingdoms and stuff. But I went my whole life planning, working hard, achieving, planning, working hard, achieving. I mean, so much so that I got all the way to I checked every box on my checklist. I graduated with the degree that I wanted. High honors, married the guy, landed the job, bought the big house. And then finally, I planned and worked hard my whole life. But I got to be honest and tell you that I dreamt my whole life the biggest thing I wanted to be was a mom. With all the other stuff I wanted to do in this world, being a mom was at the top of my list. And for those of you that have carried a baby or are very close to somebody that has, I'm sure that you can agree that when you first find out that you're pregnant, if you're like me, it's, okay, great. I just want to have a healthy baby. And by about month 7, if you're me, I was like, okay, as my belly's growing, I'm like, okay, healthy baby, belly's getting bigger, graduating summa cum laude, belly's getting bigger. He's going to be a pitcher for the Phillies, right? Like my dreams were ginormous for this child. And I'll never forget when in January of the year 2000, when everyone was just trying to figure out the world was still going to be here with Y2K, right? With the computer glitches that were happening. I was welcoming my firstborn son, and to tell you that it was the happiest time of my life. Of course, I guess because every single box was checked, right? But it was just incredible for me to finally have this dream come true moment, everything I'd ever worked for and hoped for. And then at 4 months old, a doctor said to me, "Your son is blind." And I don't know if you all know any blind people, but at that point, my baby was the first blind person I had ever met. And as I had initially envisioned valedictorian, summa cum laude, marriage, right? All of that was extinguished with one little sentence: "Your son is blind." And my dreams and myself crashed to the floor in that doctor's office at Children's Hospital, Philadelphia.
So here's what we want to point out. Anytime you experience something like that, it takes so much away from you. It takes away your identity. It takes away who you thought you were. As Kristin said, it takes away your dreams and your hopes and where you think you're going. But it also can provide an opportunity. So here's what we want to know from you. What is your sucker punch or train wreck? You can put it in the chat. It could be something major, as we've gone through. It could be COVID. I mean, who isn't exhausted by this whole thing? I mean, when is it going to end already? It could be that feeling that you get, especially if you have teenagers or little ones, that you're being pecked to death by chickens every single day. It doesn't have to be major. It could just be a general feeling of something is not right, but it's yours and you have to own it and you have to look at it. So put it in the chat. Nicole, if you want to jump in with anybody who has anything to say, what is your sucker punch or train wreck? What's the thing that you are trying to get away from? It could be something with being motivated with work again, because heaven knows that's an issue. So put it in the chat. We'll take a look at that. And here's the other thing that we want you to know. It's not a blessing, right? You know how people say, oh, it was a problem, but it was a blessing. It's not a blessing. It's terrible. Okay, the workforce crisis in your industry is your current train wreck. Comparing yourself to others. Oh my gosh, it's the worst. Sucker, oh, your dad's Alzheimer's disease. We had issues with my father-in-law and with my mother-in-law. All of these.
I see a couple coming through. Do you want me to read them or do you?
Yeah, go ahead,
Yeah,
Nicole.
go for it.
Okay, so I had seen comparing myself to others in my field. The workforce crisis in our industry is my current train wreck. The sucker punch impacting the families, the Alzheimer's, we just said that. Vaccination differences and family members.
Yeah,
Losing my
tough.
mom at a young age and now being without a mom, being a mom without her. A second miscarriage during COVID.
So sorry, Leslie. So sorry. As you'll notice by these things, they really run the gamut. What we want you to understand is that your sucker punch or train wreck can be anything, and do not minimize it. Somebody said comparing themselves to others in their field. We also tend to do that personally, where we go, oh, well, I don't have it that bad, so my problem's not a big deal. If it's affecting your life, it's a deal. It's a big deal. And you have every right to look at that and figure out what it is so that you can begin to rise. And that's where we're going to go from there. We're going to go to the rise. And here's what we want you to know. Here's what I want you to figure out. This is Kristin's line, and I love it.
Well, here's the thing, I'm thinking as I'm listening to those items in the chat being read off, I know that there's a lot of you that are like me that don't necessarily want to put them in the chat, and they're on your minds and on your hearts, and you might be thinking, oh, well, gosh, like me, a relationship, someone I was dating that just ended. That's not as big as a blindness diagnosis or Alzheimer's. It is big. It's big when it happens to you, and it's big where you're at in your life. And then here's the other piece of this. It doesn't stop. dang sucker punches, we'll get through one and then another one comes and another one comes, right? And that's the core of why we do the work we do. Because if you're like me, several years ago, I was like, man, I've come through all of this. Why am I now facing divorce? Then I get through that. Why am I now having to deal with custody battles? Like, why does it keep coming? Because, ladies and gentlemen, that is this thing called life. This stuff just keeps coming, but I promise you, going through these steps of the rise, I take it, it's easier for me now. It's easier for me. I recognize what's happening, and then I put these steps in place. And at the core of all of it, when these sucker punches hit and I'm frustrated, angry, depressed, going for miles through Tyler Park, running away, and it's not getting any better, I ask myself, as soon as I find myself in that pit and don't know whether I want to take a step forward, do I want to come through this broken or brilliant? Because you guys, you're coming through. I mean, you're still breathing every day. You still got to get up the next day. If you got families that you're providing for, people on your payroll that you have to make stuff happen, you're coming through. But do you want to do that coming from a place of broken, which you're none of you. I'm looking at this list. I saw the list of the people that are involved in this organization. Nobody is here to live life broken. You all have a brilliant purpose in this world. And that is where we want you to get to come through this brilliant.
And if you think about that definition of resilience at the very beginning, that first slide that we showed you, it said coming through crisis and challenge without letting it crush your spirit. So the fact of the matter is that resilience is a mental issue. It's a mental decision that you have to make. So you get to start every challenge and crisis making that decision. Do you want to come through broken or brilliant? And here's the next question that we want to ask you. And you have to ask yourself every time something like this happens. The beginning of the rise starts with a question. Are you just visiting this place of challenge, or are you going to live there? It's a very simple question that makes all the difference in how you approach it. Every single time that we have a challenge or a crisis or whatever, give yourself the time to whine. Give yourself the time to shake your fist. We are great fist shakers here. We scream, we yell, we say things to God that we probably shouldn't say, but we're visiting that place of challenge. We are not packing our suitcases and getting a nice squishy beanbag chair and squishing ourselves down and living there. You get to make the decision, and you have to make the decision or you are going to end up stuck. You're going to be in that beanbag. It's not a good place to be. You never get out of it.
No, because then Mary Fran will call you and kick you out of it.
As I've done many times with Chris.
When I'm crying in my Jeep for too long over a sucker punch, then she's like, okay, here we go. We're moving out.
We're moving out. So make that decision. That is the first step to the rise. Make the decision. Are you just visiting, or you're going to live there? You acknowledge, you experience, but then you make a decision that this event is not going to define the rest of your life. It'll influence it. It'll influence your decisions, but it's not going to be your entire story. So make that decision. And now we are going to rise. And the next step in that is what I call being a 15-minute master. When people found out and we didn't spread the word, like take up a billboard on 95, I'm not a Facebook poster. If you want to know about me in terms of my personal life, you're not going to find it there. I didn't go on Facebook and go, guess what? My son's a heroin addict. No, didn't do that. But because people didn't really know what was going on, when people heard little things, they would very well-meaning, loving family, friends and all, would say to my husband and I, well, you'll just have to take it one day at a time. And Dave and I would go, well, you've clearly never lived with an addict, because in the life with an addict, things change exponentially in minutes. And anyone who has had that experience, I feel your pain, but things change like that. We couldn't take it a day at a time. We couldn't take it half a day, an hour. We were down to 15 minutes at a time. So when you are going through a crisis or a challenge, sometimes, and especially at the beginning of it, the only thing that you can do is get through the next 15 minutes. Don't put any more pressure on yourself than that. For the people who had personal issues with Alzheimer's and the miscarriages, there are going to be times when you are so overwhelmed that you can do nothing but sit there and cry. Do it, but do it for the 15-minute time period, and then try to move away from it with one step. And we'll get to that part next. But start with 15 minutes.
And your 15 minutes could then look like, last week I was having some massive challenges through a whole big family court custody thing. And I did what can I do in 15 minutes? What can I do to get through this next 15 minutes of the barrage of emails, right? I can make this phone call to an attorney. I can put an autoresponder on. What can I do in 15 minutes? And then I started looking at, in 15 hours from now, this one thing is going to resolve itself. This one isn't. 15 hours later, I was able to say, okay, that gave me a nice window of time to really reflect and see what my next action step is going to be. So sometimes you're in the 15-minute thing, and then sometimes it might be 15 hours. But what we want to make sure that we aren't doing, which I am famous for, is looking 15 years ahead. Like, I get paralyzed with not taking that first action step and what can I control in 15 minutes, because I start thinking, and we're going to go into this in a little bit, I start thinking about what it's going to impact 15 years from now. Well, COVID did a real good thing for me in letting me know that who knows what's going to happen even tomorrow. So let's just work on this 15 minutes.
Yeah, live in that immediacy of the moment. We tend to think that these big challenges, we have to take on the whole thing. You're never going to be able to take on the whole thing. If you can take on the whole thing and solve it in 15 minutes, it's not a challenge. It's just life. So break down these things into manageable pieces. Start with living through the next 15 minutes, especially when we never know what the heck's going to happen. Start there. That's your first thing. The next thing that you need to do is figure out your transferable skills.
So we've got a bunch here on the screen. We just did like a really quick brain dump of what the skills are, and then we're going to talk about how you make them transferable. So if you want to scan through that real quick, analytical thinking, loyalty, observation, strategic planning, give some thought to what just those skills that just jump off the screen at you, like, that's me. My kids will tell you that logic is not one of mine. Excuse me. Maybe it's not my first skill, but anyway, passion, of course, Mary Fran put me in there as passion, but think about, and if you want to drop them in the chat, that those are the things that just jump right off the page, that is you, right? You may not have thought about this in a while, but these are the things that are at your core and trust me on this, because I did not believe this in the very beginning, that this was what actually was happening with me. That if you know these skills at your core and you keep them, like I, for a while there, had them on a Post-it on my monitor to remind myself when, it's kind of like you get that negative self-talk in your head. Oh, I don't listen well, and I'm just not creative anymore, and I'm depleted. I would keep them on my screen to say, Kristin, you're intelligent, you're extremely creative, you're really funny, even though some people don't think so sometimes.
Just ask her, she'll tell you.
I would tap into them. So as these things are happening, I'm like, wait a minute. How can my creative skills help with this? I'm a very good strategic planner. How can I get us out of this workforce issue right now? I have these skills. Let me implement them in this next section of my rise. And to give you a really good example, and I love talking with folks from around here in our hometown, because you probably heard of David Fajgenbaum, maybe not, who is a New York Times bestseller. He happens to be a good friend of mine in the rare disease community. David Fajgenbaum is at Penn, and he had quite the life as the football quarterback, with the super cute girlfriend, and he was on his way to having this amazing life, and then gets this rare disease where they said to the doctor, was like, we've tried everything we possibly can, we can't save you. Now, David also had become a doctor. So now here he is as a doctor, and he's got this disease that nobody can cure. He is like the epitome of the example of, he tapped into his skills, research, the medical jargon, and his extreme knowledge, right? And he developed a treatment to preserve his life to get and the disease is completely in remission. Then he goes a step further and builds this worldwide network for his rare disease so that he can provide treatments and treatment options, because now they're doing a couple of different things for the different mutations in that disease. But he builds this huge global network for Castleman disease because he had these incredible skills of putting information together. And then we had him on our show, right? He is so fun and he's so super cute to talk to and he's so grateful, right? We had him on the show to talk about all that. And he goes, oh, by the way, now we're putting a halt and using the entire global Castleman's network to research COVID and where it's all starting from, like all these different things that the scientific community couldn't figure out. And I'm like, of course you are, because, you know, you just wake up and now you're going to cure COVID. But he is such a great example of rising. I mean, think about it. You know, you're told there's no option and you're sitting there, and then he taps into those skills and works on this cure.
Yeah.
Quite
And the way he did that, I think, is really interesting, because what David did was find a drug that was used for other things, for other, you know, diseases. And he figured out with his own skill set how that drug might be applicable to him. So again, you don't have to be curing a disease here, but these are the things that people say to you, hey, you're really good at this. Can you help me with whatever? These are the skills that your mind immediately goes to. Do you start breaking down problems right away? Do people come to you because you're a good listener? Do you have like a steel trap memory? I'm really good with that when it comes to recounting things that my husband said that he shouldn't have said. I remember all of it. Are you a good problem solver? Is it research? Communication? I mean, that's in this day and age, communication is a big one. So, and think about how those things can be used and transferred to different applications. That's kind of what we're talking about here. David took his skill set and he transferred it to a different application. The thing about transferable skills is some of them are learned. Some of them come very naturally to you. Some of them are skills in the sense of like strategies or knowledge with math or research or whatever. And some of them are skills that are just, perhaps they're like emotional, perhaps they're more intuitive. But that's why we kind of put this little list together, because people tend to put skills in categories. We want you to look at your whole skill set that makes up who you are and figure out how those skills are transferable.
My friend, there's some really good ones being dropped in the chat box. People
Oh,
have,
good. What are
really
some
have
of
a
them?
good knowledge of themselves, of, you know, you all are really dialed into the skills that you have, which is it's, you're already, you know, a leg up on getting the rise going, because you're in touch with this. I like this one: empathy, humor, and loyalty, all in one package. We got to hang out after
and
this.
there's some of our favorites too. You can't, those are the kinds of things that you can't live without, like humor is the kind of thing that gets you through the day. But I love the 15-minute hourglass timer, perfect for the first exercise. Put that timer on. I'm going to get you one of those, Kay. Learning to
You know, I
delegate.
try to do it on my phone. I try to do the countdown for 15 minutes, and then it never fails that a kid will text me, and then it screws the whole thing up. I'll get the
Empathy,
timer.
patience, logic, loyalty. I love all of that stuff. Ability to compartmentalize. See, all of those things probably come very naturally to you. And that's one of the things that we tend to overlook. The stuff that comes naturally to us, we feel like, oh, that's not a big deal. That's where your brilliance lies. That's the place. That's your sweet spot. You have to reflect on those things that come naturally to you. So do that. Take the time to go, what am I really good at? And guess what? If you don't know, ask your girlfriends. They're the ones that, you know, you think about other people and you go, when your girlfriend's down and you go, what are you kidding me? You're this, that, and the other thing. Ask them. They'll tell you exactly.
That's a good segue into the very next slide, actually.
Yep. Okay. And that is it. Build your tribe. Build your tribe. Now, first of all, we want to acknowledge the fact that everybody has a tribe that is their natural tribe, their family, their close friends. These are your, as Kristin calls them, your do or die people. And those people are wonderful and you need them. But the problem with them sometimes is they're also the ones that go, oh, poor baby. It's okay. Don't worry. You'll be fine. That's also needed, but they're not the only people you need in your tribe. You need butt kickers and you need people who have different but complementary skill sets to your own. So when you take a look at what your transferable skills are, you are also going to notice what some of your transferable skills aren't. This is the place where you build your tribe. Whether you are addressing a specific challenge or a problem, this is where you start to look outside of your first and maybe even second level contacts. This is a place where LinkedIn is like a miracle builder as far as I'm concerned.
Well,
Because
and this tribe right here in the organization.
exactly, this group of people right here, if you don't know the people in this tribe, get to know them, because I will guarantee you that there are at least 2 to 3 to 5 people within this very organization that have skill sets that are complementary to your own. And because they're members of this organization, they also are going to have another component, and they are probably going to share your skill sets and your values. Your values are so important. We had the pleasure of meeting the guy who created Pictionary on our show. He's the coolest guy. His name is Rob Angel, and we've interviewed him a couple of times. And one of the things that Rob has said is you want to find people with skill sets that complement your own, but also they must share your core values, meaning your hearts and your guts have to be aligned. Because when your hearts and guts are aligned, and we talk about values, that's actually part of the reset piece that we do in the very beginning. But when we talk about your values, when your values are aligned with other people, and then you add complementary skill sets, you have the perfect combination of a team that is going to help you get across the finish line.
I want to make sure that we get to the next couple of slides before we're ticking down to just a few minutes here. And let's go to the next slide, because I'm realizing I'm watching the chat, and you guys really get this tribe thing, because you're communicating, you're sharing the information, you're empowering other people by raising your hand and doing something. Let's go into the next slide so that we can get to the what it is we do with all of this now.
Okay, so make sure you go outside of your immediate crew. And here's the question that you need to ask yourself. The rise is always going to require action, but you have to say, what can I actually do? And ask the question that way. What can I do? Not living in the land of magical thinking here. We want to know what you can actually do with this. Now, here's your rising toolbox. Here's number 1. Take a look at that.
So when you think about what can I do, I've talked about the blindness thing, and that was really overwhelming. But even in my divorce, when money was frozen, and those of you that are in a financial crisis right now, one of the things that I had to sit and think about, what can I do for in terms of resources? You know what we did? We found my kids had all these gift cards from birthdays and graduations and all this stuff. And my daughter, who's painfully organized, took an old recipe box and categorized them all, alphabetized all, and we did a gift card challenge where for 2 weeks we tried to do all expenditures just on gift cards. Well, we got so into that sucker that every now and again we're like, hey, let's do a gift card challenge. It usually falls around the time that college tuition is due, and I'm like, let's go back to the gift card challenge. But that was something that I could do. Could I get money out of those frozen accounts? No, but I obsessed with that for way too long, and then took a look at what I actually could do. So that's one of the reframing your mind on things you can do.
And we tend to look outside of the things when we're hit with a sucker punch or something that comes at us. We tend to think that the solution has to be big and it has to be way outside of ourselves. It doesn't. Big challenges are solved with a concurrent succession of smaller steps. So this is one of the first places that you look, and check your emotional state too. If you're in the sad state, you got to get rid of that. But I personally have found that anger can be a very positive emotion in terms of getting something done. Both Kristin and I were like, this is not going to happen to our children. We are going to do something about it. So use those things as fuel.
Let's hit up the rest of
next. We've got your skills and talents. We talked about your skill set. You're going to go to that for your rising toolbox. Then we've got your tribe. Who is in it? Who can you add to it? And then here's your next thing. What is your action step? Notice the singular there. What is your action step going to be? We're talking one action step here, one single step.
let's everybody give some thought to where you are in the midst of your stuff right now, what we've talked about. Just let's give thought, have it kind of circulating in your mind of what your next action step is going to be. And we can talk about this in the breakouts if there's time for that, because I don't want us to miss out. We're ticking down here and I don't want to miss out on this is the next slide. I'm going to have Mary Fran talk about this because she coached me through this during COVID and some things that went on in my life. And it is the number one thing that keeps me taking action steps that I'm able to do. And I kind of hinted at it before. Mary Fran, click to that one and I'm going to listen to you all over again to learn even more.
Initiate your one action step, but do not be married to outcomes.
That's hard for us goal setters. I get you all. It's hard. We want to check that box.
Do not be married to outcomes. You're going to initiate an action step. And one of two things is going to happen, something or nothing. But the something is not always what we want to happen. And when it isn't, we go back into this pit and we're like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And we wring our hands and all. You have to be open-minded enough to let the situation evolve. How many times do your plans work out? I mean, I'm just going to ask, how many times anybody that has had a bunch of days where everything is going according to plan, please let us know in the chat because I want to become your follower. Because it never happens.
I'm moving in with them if it all goes according to plan every day. I'm hanging in the wrong place.
We need to know. Do not be married to outcomes. If you take nothing else away from this, take this away. Anytime you initiate an action step, and let me just back up a little bit and say, if you're not sure what your action step could be, you have three choices. You can do something active. You can step away and do nothing. Sometimes things just need to unknot themselves. You don't always have to be the fixer. Sometimes you can back away and you can retreat. So you can do something, you can do nothing, or you can do retreat. But whatever of those things that you do not be married to outcomes. Kristin and I initiated a lot of things with our skill sets just to put them out there and see what would happen. And here's all the stuff that happened for us. TEDx speakers, authors, Kristin's a nonprofit founder. We didn't plan on any of this. But because we lived with these RISE principles, this was like the World Dominators one.
In our own minds.
Here's the recap. You're going to rise with the resources you have. First, you're going to make that decision. You're not going to live in that place. You're going to rise with your resources. Kristin?
And then you're going to look at those transferable skills and talents. Guarantee, if you have to put them on a post-it on your monitor to remind you over these next couple of months, do it. That's what helped me.
Then you're going to build your tribe. Who can you add to your tribe, or who can you tap in your tribe that's there that you haven't tapped in a different way to add to your own skill set who complements your values?
Okay, and then you're going to figure out what you actually can do, and you're not going to be married to those outcomes. Take off the bride veil. We are not married to the outcomes. We are moving on.
And here's, everybody asked us about our kids. This is Michael, Mitchell, and Carissa. Kristin's beautiful, beautiful family.
I did end up having a second blind child and then a sighted daughter. And my sighted daughter happens to be the klutz. Figure that one out. She can see bangs into everything. And Michael did end up the valedictorian. Both of my boys are succeeding in college right now and having a grand old time.
And this is my son, David.
Some good stuff too.
David, who you can see on the left, his bad phase, the evil twins on the left and the good guys on the right. And this is us from Brilliantly Resilient. You can reach us on our Facebook community, our podcast, and I'm going to stop screen sharing now so Nicole can jump back in.
Thank you so much. Yay. I wish the only thing that's bad about virtual is we don't hear the applause from everyone, but I'm sure we're going to get some really great feedback. Thank you so much for your time and your energy today. We do have a few minutes before we close. If anyone wants to submit a question to the Q&A box, if there's no questions, that's fine, because we can move on to the breakout rooms, and you two have graciously volunteered more time to join us there, so we could keep this going. Cyber clapping.
This chat even has
Who
people
would have thought
clapping.
that would have been a thing in our dictionaries, right? Cyber clapping. Not sure quite what that is, but now we do know. Okay, so great. So I don't see any questions coming through. Like I said, I'd rather us just get into our breakout rooms. So just want to share a few reminders before we jump over. We are sending the recording of today's event along with the attendee list for introductions and an event survey. So please remember to check your email. You can register for all of our SCW events at scwmainline.com. And our next event is on February 10th on how mentoring builds employee leaders and company success. The event will be open for registration probably sometime early next week. And as always, you can let me or any of our chamber staff members know what we can do to help you or your business. And we thank you so much for joining the webinar portion of today's program. You can go to that meeting link in the chat function now for the breakout sessions. I'll see you there in a few moments. My colleague, Stacey Reimel, will be there to assist you through the transition. And my other colleague, Senya Scott, will be assisting you here in the transition, just in case you didn't get the link. She's going to keep posting it or try to send it to you via email. You might already have the link in your email from the email address that you registered with. So jump on over to the breakout sessions and I'll be there in a minute or two. Let me get Senya over here. But thank you again, Mary, Fran, and Kristin. I'll see you over there.
All right.
Okay, you'll send us, is that right, Nicole? Because
yeah, the meeting link. Yep, the meeting link is
And
in
is there
the
the
chat.
question in there that we follow?
Yes, so there is a question. We were just asking if there were specific tools or resources that assist in others making a step back from a comeback that maybe were different,
Okay.
or if they have any of those tips and tricks that they didn't hear you share today.
Awesome.
But here, I'll jump the link in here one more time, and then I'll get Senya over here. Do you guys see the chat? It's in there.
Yep.
If you click on that part of the chat, it'll bring you over to the meeting room.
It'll take us over there?
Yep.